of the best former players who is now commentator. Way better, in my opinion, than Chris Collinsworth or Phil Simms or anyone else's, like I said, former player guy. But man, something about Joe Buck drives me nuts. I don't know. Let me know what you think on Twitter and Facebook if you agree. But so anyway, it was, the big game of the week, league-wide as well, not just here in Minnesota and hopefully, where we don't get enough respect across the border. In Wisconsin, Roger Goodell was even at the game in attendance, was in town on Sunday checking out the new U.S. Bank Stadium, getting a tour of that and seeing how they're coming along and whatnot, and hobnobbing it up with everybody. So by those thoughts, if there was a fix-in on the refs, one would have thought that it would have been to, in the Vikings' favor. But if you watched the game, you would know, and this was likely your take here in Minnesota, that the referees called a very, very one-sided game. Now at first, because I watched the game for you guys twice, that's how much I'm willing to give of myself, in some cases sacrifice for you guys, is I put myself mentally and emotionally through that Vikings loss, that embarrassment, twice for you guys, for your own entertainment as well as learning tool. Because here every week on Balls Deep Sports Talk we have a segment called The Purple Vein, where I talk all things Viking, as I am right now, even though this is officially the Balls on Fire segment. Again, we're inceptioning it up here this week. But I rewatch every play of every game, sometimes multiple times per play, to get an accurate grade of plus or minus or neutral, an unmarked, play, going through the film for you guys so that we can really understand what individual players truly did or did not play well, if the coaching staff did or did not do, their part, which units on the team, you said units, which units on the team, whether it be the linebacking core or the offensive line or the receivers or whatever, which parts of the team actually did well and which ones struggled. I go through all the game tape and analyze and assess that with my self-anointed elite football mind, and I give that to you. And so far, we've been pretty much right on every week here in our judging of the film, where when we're done judging the film, we can basically guess what the statistics for the game were or what the variables must have been in order to determine, what we know to be the final score. So you'll be getting that coming up here momentarily. But first off, just some general feelings on the game. Because I mentioned it was a big game. It's always the biggest game, the biggest two games of the year for us here in Minnesota. Yes, we are a rival with the Bears. They would be our second rival, but we don't get up for the Bears the way we get up for the Packers. And the Lions, let's face it, nobody gets up for the Lions. The Detroit Lions are one of the anti-Viagras of the NFL franchises. Nobody gets up to play those guys. I like that. We're going to have to coin that one, maybe put that in the show description or something this week. But anyway, the meat and potatoes for this Thanksgiving week, of how I felt, and I think the majority of fellow Vikings fans here in Minnesota felt, both while watching the game and after the game, now that we've had time to process it, is just that it's not. We were outplayed. It was just a plain and simple, they were better than we were that day. End of story. But after watching the film, as well as then looking at the statistics, it wasn't by a 30-13 margin by any means. It was, it was much more of a 3 to 7 point margin of really how we were outplayed, not a 17-point margin. We weren't outplayed, outcoached, anything like that by a 17-point margin. And on the other side, the Packers were good, but they weren't great. They were better than they had been the last 3 weeks, was it 2 or 3 weeks? I believe it was 3 weeks in a row that they had lost. They were improved from that. However, there were still a lot of miscues on their part, a lot of drops on the wide receivers, as well as wrong communication, miscommunication, confusion with Aaron Rodgers and his receivers. Rodgers throwing it one way, the receiver breaking the route the other way, and the ball just going to a really weird spot on the field, and people, Rodgers in particular, being unhappy, about it, as he should. So I think, like I said, for me personally and for a lot here in Minnesota, it was frustrating that we lost by so much, even though the Packers didn't play amazingly great football. Did they play better football than we did? Of course they did. Put it this way, overall as a team, the Packers on a scale of 1 to 10 were about a 7, maybe an 8. Definitely somewhere no lower than a 6, no better than an 8 on a 1 to 10 scale last week. The Vikings, however, conversely, were somewhere from a 4 to a 6 on that 1 to 10 scale as far as their overall performance as a team, and coaching staff included in that. When I say team, I mean team, not just players. If I meant just the players, I'd say players. Now, when I say team, that's players and coaching staff. But so in typical Vikings fashion, it was one of those games where the result, the final outcome of the game, wasn't an our best versus their best, and their best was better. It was we didn't bring our best, and that's the main reason that we lost. Had we brought our best, played our A game, or even our A- game, or even our B+ game, had we played our B+ game on Sunday, we would have walked out of that game about 3-point winners probably. But we didn't. We played about, like I said, a 4 to a 6, so that would be like a C, anywhere from a D+ to a C, if you want to look at it letter grades wise. So it was a hard game, low scoring throughout the first half, just up until the very end, where the Vikings really blew that last couple minutes in the second quarter, shifting the momentum, shifting how the play calling could play out from that point on in the second half, and just really letting the game get away from us at a point in time where we didn't even really need to get it back so much as we just needed to stay in it and keep it where it was, and there was no reason that we shouldn't have been able to accomplish that. But as I told you, I had to painfully relive that failure, as well as many others, twice this week in live time and then in studying the film. However, if you were watching the game and were a Minnesota Vikings fan, there was one just undeniable highlight to the game. You know what I'm talking about. That's right. Squirrel! There was a squirrel that ran on the field in the first quarter, I believe it was, of the game, and the Fox cameraman and announcers were totally digging on it. They had to pause the game for just a tiny bit to get it taken care of. I believe Jarius Wright or someone on the Vikings team was even trying to corral him humanely with a coat or something at one point in time. But so he was running around and the cameraman was loving it, and then going into the commercial break they showed him again, and this time they had him it zoomed in to him running on the field and running it in slow motion, and I'm telling you, the squirrel video footage, both slow motion and real time, were without question the top highlight of the Vikings-Packers game if you were a Minnesota Vikings fan. Otherwise, things to cheer about and be excited about in general were for the most part hard to come by, or quasi unfruitful, and ultimately didn't get the job done. You all know the end result. So let's get to the film grades. Again, I do this for every single player, every single game, every week, as well as the coaching staffs, or I mean not the coaching staffs, but Norv Turner as a coach, Zimmer as a coach, and then some units like the offensive line as a whole and the special teams units as a whole, in addition to referees. And this week I included broadcast performance because I got a gripe on this quick, and then we'll get into the grades. Seriously, Fox, your national game of the week at 3:25 in the afternoon, when we're on the first possession of each team and we're showing, the starting lineups, who's playing for each team, they showed 5 freaking offensive players for the Vikings total, and they showed 5 defensive players for the Packers total, and then they showed 5 offensive players for the Packers total, and then they showed 4 defensive players for the Vikings total. News to Fox, there are 11 starting players on each side of the ball of a professional NFL football team, and every broadcast that everyone else has done for at least the last 10, 20, 30 years shows you all the starters. Here's the starting offensive linemen, all 5 of them. Here are your starting tight ends, your starting running backs, and your starting wide receivers. And then the quarterback gets his own, one brought up right away when they first come out onto the field. So everybody knows all the starters on both sides of the ball. Game of the week, they give us 5, 5, 5, and 4. Are you kidding me? You didn't have enough time or screen space or, technology or whatever it was you were missing to give us all 11 starters on each side of the ball for both teams. I mean, come on. Inexcusable. And then, of course, just Joe Buck being a borderline unbearable idiot when it comes to football commentary. So 2 minuses for the Fox broadcast team to start off our film grading here in the purple vein in Balls on Fire. So, okay, first let's get this out of the way. I felt this was big. Watching the game in live time, felt we were getting jobbed by the refs. A lot of other people felt we were getting jobbed by the refs as well. Rewatching the film, almost every single penalty, I want to say it was in fact every single penalty that was called on us was in fact a legitimate penalty call. Yes, I am even including the penalty on Anthony Barr, because on that play he was not penalized for his initial bump at the 5-yard line mark on the tight end Richard Rodgers. It was the contact he made with wide receiver Davante Adams 2 yards farther down the field immediately following that he was flagged for, and is in fact illegal contact. So that penalty was 100% spot on, even though at the time, primarily because of how the announcers are idiots and don't know what's going on, I was thrown off and thinking that they were calling the contact, the press bump that he gave to Rodgers at the 5-yard mark, which is still within the rules. But so the refs, again, the penalties they called on us were all penalties, but there was a ton of penalties that they did not call on the Packers that they could have and should have. And that showed up in the stats sheet. ultimately they were given a -8 grade. They had 8 negatives on my grading